so much for coming this evening to what is a really important issue in our British society, I believe. A little my story, in as much as I'm a bit of a misfit in all this, because to be honest with you, there has been very little said about my case for reasons which will become apparent. In fact, probably Nick and one or two others are the few people who've actually mentioned it. And that is because my husband was a Detective Chief Superintendent of the Metropolitan Police. I was a serving police officer. And back in the early 2000s, he went on to Crime Watch, where I was a presenter, to make an appeal to ask the public for help, to help solve a case of the most, I mean, all murder is difficult, but the most appalling a murder. Sorry, can you hear me? Again. Yes, so basically he went on to Crime Watch to appeal for assistance to help solve the murder of a private investigator whose name is Daniel Morgan. He was involved in a private investigations company called Southern Investigations and was found brutally murdered in the car park of a pub in southeast London back in the 1980s, almost 30 years ago. My husband was launching a new investigation into this murder, and there had been some 3 before that. Because of police corruption and various other issues, no one had been brought to justice. But it was felt that another stab at trying to solve this murder should be taken, and as a result of that appeal, it was understood that we as a family would become a target of the suspects in that murder, or the people who are suspected of committing that murder, to try and discredit him and, by association, me, to perhaps derail that investigation. We were put under the umbrella of the Victim Support Scheme. And very shortly after that broadcast, we were put under surveillance. We noticed, because we noticed that sort of thing, we noticed white vans following us around. Our mail was tampered with, things were moved in our garden, various other things happened. When one of those vans was stopped, it turned out that the people actually inside the van were a reporter and a photographer from News International. There has been a bit in the press about the press's association with private investigators, and they are perfectly entitled to use private investigators. But clearly this was a step beyond, and it was certainly my view, and I gave evidence at Leveson, that I felt that this was a very well-resourced news organisation which had an affiliation with an investigation company, and they were using that resource to try and derail a murder investigation. A really serious allegation, but one you will never hear, or very rarely hear, spoken of in the press. We later found out, a few years later, that our phones had been hacked, and possibly other things had been going on as well. We were obviously very distressed by what happened. We were police officers. I'd been a police officer investigating serious crime for many years, but felt that we'd done everything we could to protect our family. But this was truly shocking. But whatever we went through was absolutely nothing in compared with the 30-year battle that Alistair Morgan, Daniel's brother, and his family have gone through. Alistair and his family have been fighting tooth and nail to try and get justice for their brother, and I would like to personally pay tribute to them here. And I know Alistair's here to say it's been an extraordinary battle for them to fight against the police corruption and the involvement of the media in trying to suppress and derail that investigation. Is Alistair here?
Yes, I think he is.
I just want to say pay tribute to lots of people here. There is an investigation panel going on, led by
Baroness Alone.
Baroness Alone, and that's ongoing, and hopefully that will come to some sort of conclusion and expose something of what went on. My view is that there should be an independent regulator, and it's just extraordinary there isn't one. I joined Hacked Off because I was just so appalled by the fact that honest journalists and the integrity of the press needed to be cleaned up, and I've sat alongside Hacked Off for many years now fighting for that, and I'm so pleased to see so many of you joining us in that, because when the police let you down, when politicians let you down, who do you have left to go to? And one would hope it's a free press with integrity and honesty. And I would very much like to see, because I'm a bit of an optimist, I would very much like to see that happen again in the future. And we will continue fighting for that, because we're not going to back down anymore. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jacqui's final remarks about the need for an honest press with integrity is a good way of asking Nick Davies if he would like to just reflect on what he heard from Joe this evening as a working journalist.
Well, I'm sitting here. I'm cold because there's no heating in the hall. I haven't got my own mic, so that at least underlines what Joe was saying about the need for giving money to Hacked Off. Beyond that, one very important thing is to pick up on what Joe was summarizing about the addiction to falsehood and distortion in some of these newspapers and their use of caricature and cliche, and reflect that that affects not just their reporting of the private lives of celebrities, but also of really huge issues, like, for example, what we should do about ISIS. There you have an issue of extraordinary complexity being reduced to cliche. You saw it earlier this year where the Daily Mail, for example, were reacting to the flow of refugees from Syria by running pieces from Greek holiday resorts, reflecting the understandable anger of Daily Mail readers whose holidays were being interrupted by the sight of impoverished Syrians washing their clothes in the sea. So Syrian refugees were another kind of cliche, almost as in fact they have since compared them to rodents coming in. And then one dead boy on a beach flips it to a different sort of caricature. Now suddenly we all like them. Then bombs in Paris flick it back. That's just no way to conduct public debate. But that is the way we conduct public debate in this country, because those stupidities infiltrate all of the coverage. And if you hold on to that thought and then look at what's happened to the Leveson report, that report was mutilated by a campaign of falsehood and distortion by those newspapers, which was, of course, itself powerful evidence of the need for that report to be implemented. And the core of that campaign on falsehood and distortion, do you remember it actually started before the report was published? You can see the dishonesty here. None of us knew what Leveson was going to recommend. But the Daily Mail and the Sun and the other bad guys were paying for advertisements in each other's pages in which they solemnly told their readers that Leveson was going to recommend state regulation of the press. Do you remember they had these advertisements with pictures of dictators, implying that this was a dictator? That has to have been dishonest. They had no idea what he was proposing, and indeed what he did propose was nothing to do with state regulation. So it's worth just coming back to the core of what Leveson is about, what that report's about. And you could put it this way, that I've spent, whatever it is, nearly 40 years as a hack. And it's not just like some sort of abstract principle that I cherish the freedom of the press. I need it every damn day of my working life. I need the press to be free. If Leveson had been implemented, it would increase the freedom of the press. To claim that it's an inhibition or an attack on the freedom of the press is what's technically referred to as utter bullshit. And the core of this is that one of the most, perhaps the most significant restraint on the freedom of newspapers in this particular country are our libel laws. If you want to know why nobody exposed Jimmy Savile for what he was up to, it's because he was alive and therefore capable of suing. And over again, we're not allowed to tell the truth, particularly about powerful rich people, because they can sue us from hell to breakfast. If Leveson is implemented, with an independent regulator that has an arbitration arm which can handle disputes about stories which damage people's character, that becomes a substitute for people suing us. And there are these devices which are supposed to be enacted by John Whittingdale, whom we cannot trust, which provide powerful incentives for that to happen. So if Leveson is implemented, it makes it possible for me to do my job with far, far, far less risk of being sued. Therefore, I am freer. And to look at those newspapers rejecting the opportunity to increase their freedom. You ask why they're doing that. It's the utter hypocrisy at the core of this. All that Leveson really wants them to do is to abide by the code of conduct, which they themselves have written, and they frequently claim they want to abide by. But they've rejected the opportunity to increase their freedom because the reality, of course, is they want the right to break their own rules, because that's what sells newspapers by invading privacy and inventing stories and all of the things that Joe was talking about. So just if we come back to it, I would urge you not to lose confidence in the validity and the necessity of what Leveson was recommending. He was absolutely right. And if there's some kind of way that we can use our collective muscle to get it implemented, we would have a freer press. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, we do have roving mics, or mics carried by roving people. So if people want to ask, if anyone wants to ask any questions of the panel or make short points, I'll take them in groups of 3. Please show. While you're showing, I should say that if you want more details about the work, about the scandal around Daniel Morgan and the work of the campaign, then you can do no better than read Peter Jukes' work on Byline. I think Peter's here tonight, and Byline is a crowdsource funded resource, because for some reason the newspapers don't write so much about some of these scandals, but Byline does. Right, can I see any?
Good evening.
Yes.
I'm David Ahern, a Green Party parliamentary candidate from Worthing in Sussex. And what astonished me was how it was that we'd heard Rebecca Wade, or Brooks as she now is, say on oath to a parliamentary committee that she had paid the police, and yet she was found not guilty. And I find that totally incomprehensible. I wondered what the panel's comments would be.
Well, I think we will give you an answer to that, because there's a legally qualified person, at least one, on the panel that can give a reflection. Could you go to where the other questions were on that side that I couldn't see, while Andy Miller, who was mentioned by Jo in her speech, says a word or two. Try it, Andy.
Is it on?
That's
yeah.
it, yeah.
Hi, yeah, I'm Andy. Jo, thanks for covering my stuff. Briefly, 6 years beating the Daily Mail. It seems to me... Thank you. It seems to me that John Whittingdale watering down, diluting, fudging, running away from, doing the right thing, and I won't be technical about this, could turn out to be an absolutely pivotal moment. I'd like to hear from the panel what hacked off, which I vehemently support, and we, as people in the audience who can go and tell our friends and families, what is it that's going to be done to make damn sure Whittingdale does not do this?
Okay, thank you. And I think we found another person there who wants to ask. Yeah, fire away. Say who you are, please.
I'm Candice Riley. I'm a university student. I'm doing journalism. And I was just wondering, because this event is targeting journalists, and I had to study the IPCC to pass my law exam, I was just wondering, so what is the advice for me when I leave uni to go into the press world? Where do you expect me to go? Because most of the time I would get an internship with the bad guys.
Okay, so we'll try and provide career advice. We'll say a word about and it's a fair question. We'll say a word about what we should do if the government start resiling. But first, I'd ask Hugh Tomlinson to answer a question that's often asked as to why Rebecca Brooks's apparent admission that they paid police officers was not something that seemed to be held against her in the court?
Well, from a legal position, you can't use evidence given to Parliament in court. It's part of the Bill of Rights. You can't use whatever said in a parliamentary committee is not admissible in evidence in court. I think that there's a more fundamental reason, which is that until recently, there was no statutory offence of bribing public officials until the Bribery Act came along. So it was all quite complicated as a complicated common law offence called misconduct in a public office, and that was very difficult to prove, and that's why all the prosecutions collapsed in the end. Perhaps I could just answer Andy Miller's question about John Whittingdale. Jo mentioned in her lecture, and it's a very important point, that a crucial part of the Leveson architecture, a crucial piece in the system, are the costs incentives, which will, the idea of which is to incentivize newspapers to join a regulator so that there is access to justice in the way that Nick was mentioning a few minutes ago. So an approved regulator has to have a low-cost arbitration scheme, and anybody who doesn't join that regulator, if this statutory provision is brought in, what it means is that the newspaper has to pay the costs, win or lose. So that gives people access to justice in a way that they don't have if there's no arbitration scheme. Now, the government at the moment are prevaricating about whether to bring that into effect. What we are doing is campaigning through the politicians and through our supporters more generally to ensure that pressure is put on the government to bring that provision into force. Ultimately, what will happen is that the matter will come back to Parliament because we have very strong support in both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. And we're confident that in the end our supporters will, through Parliament, hold the government to account. But Jo also mentioned this in her lecture. David Cameron promised in terms that he would implement these provisions. And if he doesn't, then that's a very serious point, because that's the word of the Prime Minister, which was given on many occasions, both to the House of Commons and to victims. So we are campaigning around that issue, and if he doesn't keep to his promise, then we will make sure that everybody knows about it.
Yeah, thank you. There are people here tonight who suffered personal tragedy and then were victims of press abuse, who were given that commitment by the Prime Minister. We arranged that he had to say that, so I think he just needs to be reminded of that, I think. I'm going to ask Nick about what journalists should do. The NUJ strongly supports the Leveson proposals, it needs to be said, so journalism as a whole does. The problem is definitely not with journalists, as Jo said, it's with their commanding officers. But Nick, what would you advise a putative young journalist?
Okay, first of all, I want to say this. It's a really good job. So don't give up. I mean, because at best you get paid to do interesting things and see interesting things. Or in fact, beyond that, you get paid to hurt bad people. Can I see Mark Covell in the audience? There's a couple of people. Okay, I thought I recognize. The thing is, one of the wonderful things about being a reporter is that it puts you into contact with all sorts of extraordinary folk. Mark Covell, who's sitting there, was taking part in a demonstration in Genoa where there was a G20 summit, G8, and the police attacked a building where he was outside and beat him just about to death. He was very, very lucky to survive. And when he was in hospital, scarcely alive, a reporter from the, guess what, Daily Mail infiltrated the hospital, screwed quotes out of Mark in a semi-comatose condition, and then produced an entirely vindictive and false story accusing him of organizing a riot, a defenseless, half-dead man, a victim of their bullshit dishonesty. So he, Mark, like Andy, sued the bastards, and you won in the end, didn't you? Yes, well done, Mark. while we're on the joys of being a hack, there is somebody else here. The sequence of stories which The Guardian wrote about all this began with Gordon Taylor from the Professional Footballers Association suing, and ended, or came to a climax, with the story about Millie Dowler being a victim. Those two stories have one thing in common, one person in common, one particular lawyer who has the most extraordinary delight in causing trouble. He likes trouble more than any other man I've met, and I think it's true to say that without those two cases, Gordon Taylor and Millie Dowler, we wouldn't have exposed the phone hacking. And that's Mark Lewis, sitting very quietly over there. He's really the hero of this tale. Mark. Okay. So, enough of being nice about people. Paul Dacre. So, the thing is this. You're right to ask yourself this question, and there is only one answer. So Joe kind of reflected on this. There are actually masses of good journalists out there. There are also quite a lot of good newspapers. There's this hard core of 4 or 5 national newspapers who are disgusting. So don't work for them. It doesn't matter if they offer you a free internship. It's not even just simply the problem that they'll expect you to do unethical and disgusting things. It is that you yourself won't be able to lie straight in bed at the end of the day. It just isn't worth it. So stay away from them. Boycott the Daily Mail.
Yes, it's tough because they pay £1 a word for columns. We've all deprived ourselves. If people can wave a piece of... Yeah, so I see a hand at the back over there. So if the roving mic...
The gentleman ahead of me asked why...
Could you say who you are? Sorry.
Sorry, my name is Francis Durham. The gentleman ahead of me asked why Rebecca Brooks hasn't been brought to justice. I was fortunate enough to see Rebecca Brooks in the dock at the Old Bailey. And yes, she got let off. But I also saw the jury individuals there. And I must say, I thought, I bet some of them are Sun readers themselves. Can I say, our legal system is full of miscarriages of justice. And it's with the problems that Hacked Off is having, we're working with a population in this country who are more than happy to go and buy the rubbish newspapers that exist. And it's a mountain to climb. And we have to understand what we're really up against. And I don't believe there's an easy solution. What Nick Davies, 2 brilliant books, Hacked Off and Flat Earth News, describe the difficult situation. But I'm afraid I'm rather despondent that things are really going to change. It's very depressing.
Right. Well, as Jo said in her speech, previously there have been failure, but what's different this time is there is a majority in Parliament, if it can be mobilised, still engaged, and there's a victim organisation, someone speaking for the victims, which never happened before with Calcut. So we are definitely not, although we're underfunded, we are not pessimistic. It ought to be said that Hacked Off supports the jury system. Our line is, and I choose my words carefully, taken from Nick Davies, that Rebecca Brooks is entitled to her acquittal, but her defence was that she was too incompetent to know the widespread criminality that was taking place all around her. And it's not a normal company that pays someone off over £10 million and then re-employs them when they've admitted that incompetence. So, in fact, for us, I think it's fair to say, it's actually helpful for her to be there as a symbol for what is so wrong and corrupt with a small c about the way that company operates. Ed, but that's ex cathedra. If we could take the question in the middle and then we'll come to the back.
Yes, hope you can hear me all right. My name's Chris Clark. I'd like to partly build on Francis's point. Rebecca Brooks once said that we are the power of our readers. It seems to me that somehow there is a kind of toxic wedding between the readers of these particular titles and the titles themselves. And I wonder whether we've done enough to research what these readers look like, why they buy, who are they, what are their profiles, and whether they might recognise themselves as being really quite strange people sometimes. I think it's worth looking at.
Thank you. The panel will deal with that. If you could pass the microphone along to the microphone. All right, pass it back. There are people in the front row who are professors studying that very question, but they're not on the panel. But we'll struggle through despite that. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Daniel Saville. I've got a question in terms of the very good sense that Nick was explaining about the Royal Charter. Why aren't there more publications that come out and say they're in favour and will support the new system? In particular, I subscribe to Private Eye, and it's a brilliant magazine that holds newspapers and MPs to account, and yet it's not in favour. I don't understand that.
Okay. Right. The panel will deal with that. I suspect there's a one-word answer called shtick, which will be explained. If you pass it behind you, sir, and we'll take one more in this round.
Hi, my name is Janita Smith. I just wanted to ask a question on photography. Do you think more can be done on regulating what photographers can and can't do? And do you think that plays a part in, because it's not just the written word, it's sometimes you can't get the story without the images, and I know photographers go out there intentionally to create stories. What else can be done about that?
Thank you. Hugh, if you can deal with the question of whether there's a particular regime for photography and any thoughts you have. Well, I now ask Jo if she has any thoughts about Rebekah Brooks. That's probably a provocative question. And I'm going to ask Nick Davies to deal with, if he doesn't mind, the question of whether newspaper readers actually agree with the newspapers on this issue, whether he's aware of what polls show on that, and the Private Eye question. But if we start with Hugh Tomlinson, photography.
Some people will remember that after the death of Princess Diana, the Daily Mail said it wouldn't use paparazzi photographs anymore because I think that lasted for about 3 months. The position is photographers are a big problem because many of them are not employed by anybody, any newspaper at all. They're agency photographers, and so the newspapers have plausible deniability, so they can say nothing to do with us, these people pursuing individuals down the street. But the newspapers should be, and sometimes in periods of national crisis promise to, but then go back on their promises, they should be agreeing not to use photographs that are taken in improper ways where improper pressure is put on people.
Jo, Rebekah Brooks, have you got anything more to add? Don't have to refer to Horsegate.
Don't have to refer to what?
Horsegate.
Well, I find Rebekah Brooks a thoroughly depressing figure in the way that I found Margaret Thatcher a thoroughly depressing figure, because, I mean, as a woman and a feminist, for years I have felt that I want to be able to admire and to support women making it in what is quite a male-dominated arena. And I mean, I have had dealings in the past with Rebekah Brooks, and I have said rude words down the road, phone to her, and she said rude words back to me. And it was very enjoyable. I just find it sort of so depressing that in the face of such unerring evidence of her wrongdoing, because it's not recounted in the right arena, that there seems to be nothing that can be done, and we've had to welcome her back again. Well, welcome's obviously a euphemism for saying fuck off again to her inside. And I spend quite a lot of time thinking how we can get round her being welcomed back and being shooed off again. And I'll get back to you when I've thought of a foolproof plan.
Thank you. Jacqui, at the time that you were put under surveillance, your husband at the time, didn't he have a meeting with Rebekah Brooks and ask for an explanation about why News International were putting a police officer leading a murder investigation where the lead suspects were associated with News International under surveillance? Did she have a good answer?
Yes, as you can imagine, there were some ripples of unbelief or disbelief in the Metropolitan Police when a senior detective was put under surveillance by a national newspaper associated with this particular murder inquiry, and she was challenged at Scotland Yard on it. I think the explanation was that they were investigating the fact that my husband and I were having an affair, apparently.
With who? With each other?
With each other, yes, yes. I'm sure I can think of much more exciting and interesting stories to make up, but my imagination is obviously much bigger than hers. Yes, and that's the best, really, they've ever come up with, which is clearly rubbish, as we've been married for several years and had 2 children who are here, or one of them which is holding a microphone. So.
Nick, can you say a word about the group mentality, if that's what it is, of publications and the private eye posture?
Was it something to do with readers?
Well, there were 2 questions. There was one about why there aren't more newspapers opting into the Leveson scheme.
With private eye as an example.
And especially private eye was an example. And then the second question was, do newspaper readers believe the editorials when it comes to Leveson matters?
Newspaper readers are in a state of great confusion because if you look at the opinion polls, there are overwhelming majorities in favour of implementing the Leveson report and stopping newspapers invading people's privacy and all the rest of it. But it is quite clear that the same majority of the population are buying the newspapers which break the rules that they claim to want to see enforced. So people are complicated. I mean, it's just a sort of rather large-scale example of the fact that all of us do things which we know we shouldn't. And, of course, that's what drives those newspapers to break those rules, is that it's commercially very, very successful to peek through the bedroom keyhole and see who's shagging who. It sells bloody newspapers. And there's the problem, that readers like it, and therefore turn a blind eye to the rules they claim to want to see enforced. As to Private Eye and other newspapers, I mentioned before that grossly dishonest campaign by the bad guys in Fleet Street. Okay. But beneath that, there was a much more subtle debate, because this isn't an easy subject to tackle. If you strip it down to its core, the question that Leveson is asking is, how can you regulate a free press? As soon as you begin to answer that, you drift very close to a contradiction. It's a very, very tough question to answer. So running alongside that grossly dishonest campaign, I think there was genuine anxiety among some people. Index on Censorship, for example, were very quick to get worried about Leveson. And that anxiety was legitimate. I think they came out on the wrong side of the argument and that they gave in to anxiety. Where Ian Hislop is concerned, he's a stroppy little bugger, let's face it, and he doesn't like being told what to do, which makes him a good editor and makes Private Eye magazine. And I think he just instinctively, he just didn't like the smell of anybody telling him to do anything. And I think he got it wrong. I think, just as I was talking about Leveson increasing the freedom of the press, Private Eye would be in a much better position. It would be relatively free of the law firms that have made its life a misery over the years if it would back Leveson. But Ian isn't about to change sides. So I think there's a sort of a minority of opinion that's worried about Leveson that we can reasonably respect, even though we might disagree with their conclusion. But it's the big dishonest guns that have made the difference.
Thank you. Let's have another round of questions. If people can wave again. There's one down the bottom here, and there's 2 on that side. So if the microphone person on that side can go to the chap in that row, the row you're at, and then the mic should then go to the chap on the end with his hand up, if you can see, next, and then I'll come down to the front here, Fire away, sir.
I'm probably going to get myself in trouble by what I'm going to say, but I'm going to say it in any case. And I'm going to shamelessly try and curry favour as well. I used to work with Jacqui 30 years ago, I believe it was. Long, long time. But anyway, we got on well. We remember one another.
Your name, sir? Your name, sir? Sorry.
Roger Goff.
Right.
I was a detective sergeant as well in the Metropolitan Police. And as it seems to garner huge rounds of applause, I'm about to admit that I hit a Daily Mail reporter on the head. Hold on. With a bread roll. In public, in a restaurant in Notting Hill. This was some time ago, and I was much more naive then than I am now. I went to the Mail because I had a story. I had investigated something which still is utterly explosive. And
we won't have time for
no,
it.
we won't.
Anyway,
Anyway,
I'm going to see you afterwards with a crash
I have tried to see you on quite a few occasions.
Right.
And I would also add there are at least 10 people in this room who know precisely what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Yeah?
Well, thank you.
Right, now, hold on, if I can just say one more thing, yeah? And that is that today is the 60th anniversary of the day that Rosa Parks took her seat in the bus in Alabama, yeah? When she was questioned about it afterwards, she said, well, all I did was sit down. The reason why things happened was because the masses came behind me. You've got to get behind the corruption that is in Parliament. And that's why I believe they won't institute this, because the papers have got the black on them on what I've discovered. And it's all, incidentally, none of it is secret. It's all on the internet. Thank you.
Thank you. If we can take the mic, we'll take the mic over there. But in the meantime, yeah, if you just hold on, sir. If you just hold on for a minute, because there's a chap here.
I'm afraid I've got a bit of a stutter, but I'll try and make my point. In something like 1982...
Could you say who you are? Sorry.
I'm George Taylor.
Thank you.
From somewhere near Abingdon. George Orwell is buried a couple hundred yards from where I live. In 1982, I got 91 votes for the Green Party, or the Ecology Party, in Abingdon.
I remember.
In a ward. All my life, I'm now 62, my vote has never counted where I live. If you were a monkey, you would get voted in as a Conservative where I live. But the political system that we've got is pretty powerfully manipulated by the papers, particularly the 4 or 5 papers you speak about. From my perspective, we've got a sort of Putinesque media in this country. The rich and the powerful and the old seem to be in control of this press. So I'm really concerned that you guys are successful, because it seems absolutely fundamental to having clean, decent, open debate. The current political leaders in our country here actually benefit a lot from these 4 or 5 papers.
Yes.
So I'm really afraid. So the question I've got is, I'm afraid. So if each panel member could estimate what percentage of chance they think this is going to actually come off, because I'm actually betting against you succeeding. Right. If it is going to come off, could you tell me when you think it'll actually come off, when this will come into law? Or can you estimate also to what degree you think it'll be watered down before it gets into law?
Right. Okay.
Because I don't believe you're going to win.
Right. I'll ask.
I'm afraid.
I'll ask the panel whether they're confident or not. We all know it's going to be a struggle. Final question was the gentleman over there. If that's
Lovely
all right,
to be handed the mic by the daughter of a heroine of mine. And secondly, the bad news is that we're actually fighting against thunder.
Your name, sir? Sorry.
I am Bruce Dixon, sometime schoolmaster, and nearly got Bruce Dixon.
Sorry, yeah.
Sometime schoolmaster, sometimes sacked for obscenity or nearly, and chucked out of the best job in Britain, which was designing computer education 40 years ago. Luckily, there's a £4 computer being sold as of Friday that should go to every child in Britain. And with that, we should see decent education coming across. That's a bit of the good news. The bad news is that we're up against a neoliberal idea machine. We're also up against its spawn of TTIP, and we're encouraged thereto by all the corruption in pretty well every profession where 2 or 3 are gathered together. Jesus had it right. There am I in the midst of them. 10%, says Gladwell, is enough to tip any organization bad. Guys, what we have on our side is when you're at the bottom of this sea, you can only go upwards. And if we could get every idea from every person in this room along the lines of corruption that's been covered, we might well beat the yellow files in, I'm told, certain newspapers' reading rooms. The good news then is, in my opinion, for what it is worth, you are the nucleus of something that can work against the corruption in every profession, not just in this country, but also what is blocking what's happening in what should be building Syria as opposed to bombing the hell out of it.
Okay, thank you. It's always the case that because the press is so central that it always raises questions of politics and policy when this is debated in public, because the debate isn't had in the press. I'm going to ask the panel for just a few final last words before I say my thanks and we draw the raffle, which is critical. Final words from anyone on the panel? Hugh Tomlinson, how confident are you about ultimate victory in this campaign?
I'm confident that we will give it our best shot. Whether we will win depends on what support we get from people in this room and people around the country. As was said earlier, there's a huge majority of people who support the kind of aims we've been campaigning for the past 4 years. We need to mobilize those people, and I think if we do mobilize them, we will win. Whether we do mobilize them depends on you, depends on the financial support we get, and depends on how we can keep the campaign going and effective over the next 2 or 3 years.
Thank you. Thanks. Jacqui, if you want to finish off for us from the panel.
We are very much lone voices, unfortunately. What we talk about and the debates we have aren't printed in the press. So I would ask if you've heard something here that you agree with and you want to support, please go onto Twitter and Facebook, and if you're bloggers, please pass those messages on, because for some strange reason the press generally don't print what we talk about, and that's a heartfelt plea, if nothing else, to widen the debate and to give the other side of the story. Thank you so much for coming. It really is very much appreciated by everybody involved. Thank you.
Thank you. So before the panel go, I've just got some thank yous. I should say that we should be very clear that poll after poll shows 80% of the public supporters. There's an overwhelming majority in the House of Lords and a narrow majority, we know, in the House of Commons that supports this. We have the support of grassroots journalists and the National Union of Journalists and huge numbers of people from the creative industry. Not just Joe, but other people who are entertainers, writers, leading novelists and authors. You'll find them all on our website. In fact, it's hard to find a leading novelist and indeed patron of many of the writer organisations who doesn't support us, and indeed of human rights organisations and free speech organisations like Article 19. It is literally up against the press, much of the press, and their political allies. That's what we're fighting. It's important that we win, and I think it's possible for us to do so, in fact, more than possible. I'd like to just say some thanks now, of course, to Jo, our speaker. She has a hugely hectic life. She's getting up at the crack of dawn, well, in the middle of the night tomorrow for reasons, well, she hasn't said, but all I know is she has to... I'm assured it's not a medical reason, and that's why she has to dash off pretty much at the end of this talk. But it was fantastic that she came. We offered her to write the speech. She said no, she'll do it herself. I think some of our lawyers could have written some jokes, but I think she did it better. And the content was superb. So I'd like to ask you to join with me in thanking Jo once again. I'd like to thank the panel, Hugh, Nick and Jacqui, for joining us. I need to stress that Hacked Off does three things, and that's why we need funding. We campaign to get this delivered. We support victims, not just existing victims of press abuse, but we're contacted several times a week by new people who either have been terribly treated by newspapers or have been terribly treated by newspapers and then been terribly treated by Ipso, or indeed people who have legal cases against newspapers. So it's a huge amount of work we do of victim support. And the third thing we do is we seek to communicate. And it's difficult when we don't have the press megaphone, but we are probably, I think it's fair to say, for the smallest campaign budget, the most known and applauded stroke hated by our rivals campaign organisation that exists. And I rejoice every time we get slagged off. I don't rejoice, but I have a warm glow every time we get attacked in the newspapers, because if we weren't a threat, they wouldn't be attacking us, and that's always encouraging. It gets me to bed. The person that's mainly responsible for tonight is my co-director, Daisy Cooper, and I really want to thank her for putting all this together, assisted by Grace, Bella, Nathan, Georgia and Rich, who's been filming it. So I'd like you to join me in thanking them.